I was looking and reading a little bit about your story, and we had the chance to talk a little bit before a couple weeks ago,
Yeah.
and I was able to learn a lot more about your background.
Hmm.
But there's one thing that I want to be asking you since we last spoke, and if there was a specific moment
Mm.
that set you on this path, and how did you find yourself in this very unique position of representing the UAE on such a prominent global stage?
I don't know if I could say it's one specific thing, but it's an accumulation of many things. As we discussed previously, like I come from a background where family, everyone is in sciences or business or engineers. And for the longest time growing up, I thought I would follow a similar path. So I would say maybe the beginning of the multitude or the accumulation of these moments was when I decided to pursue art, as profession or as something to study as a career, not really knowing what that really meant per se. And over time, sorry,
It's okay.
that was my phone. I thought I put on. Okay, so where was I? So it's accumulation of moments, I would say, but I think the key moment for me that maybe would, if I look back, that maybe set me on this path was deciding to pursue art as to explore and go into education, to practice as an artist, to go to art college. I had a few bumps on the way that kind of made me question my choices, let's say. But I think once I really committed to it and went to university and was full into it, that was the beginning of this much longer journey that has multiple parts to it. Brought me here today. I would never be able to say that looking back that I ever thought that this is where I would be or where I would end up. I actually thought I was going to be a practicing artist at some point. Or another point in my career, I actually thought I would give up art altogether and be very sensible and practical. But I'm really glad that it always seemed to come back into my life some way, in some shape or form. And moving to the UAE at a particular time when the art scene was going through its next iteration or blooming, let's say, was also very key to kind of set me on this path here. So coming here in the UAE at a particular time when everything was just exploding in terms of the art scene also is a catalyst that helps me continue on this path and really kind of find my, I guess you could say, career or calling at the end of the day.
You talk about this being there at the right time, which I think it
Hmm.
makes the world of difference. But that's also can be a challenge for you these days because the UAE has become very much a global powerhouse when it comes
Hmm.
to exhibitions and creating opportunities for artists. But how do you maintain its identity and cultural authenticity without creating work that also has to
Hmm.
resonate in a global level?
Yeah, I mean, it is a challenge, but the way that if we talk about what we do at the pavilion, what we're aiming to do is to, the UAE, first of all, let's step back. The UAE is still a very young country. It's still growing. It has experienced an exponential amount of growth in a very short time. And that comes with a lot of things that still haven't been uncovered or said, or you find that a lot of people are still also experimenting at the same time. And our job is to kind of unearth those stories and present them on this global platform. And in a way, reflect what's happening here outside. And also by participating outside, kind of pushing what's happening in here to become more diverse and questioning and explorative as well. So it's a kind of a give and take at the same time. And it's sometimes a fine line to when do you push and when do you receive and share at the same, working with creatives here.
And that would be my next question, the fine
Mm.
line, right? I think it's the art itself to deal
Yes, no, no,
with
for sure. Yeah.
the not only the politics, but also with the environment and being able you
Hmm.
can meet the global demands and expectations that, like an organization like the Biennale has
Hmm.
to people who's participating as well. Can you give an example, some of the push and pull they're referring to in the dialogue with artists?
Sure. I mean, one, it's again, it's multiple of things. I'm sorry, I can never give you a direct answer, but it's, on the one hand, the Biennale, as you said, comes with its own history and story, right? And expectation of what the Biennale is and the level of kind of work or participation that you're aiming to show there. How do you do that as a young country where a lot of the discourse and dialogue, some of it has been happening, but in terms of in the public is still maybe very new. And one thing I just want to say too is that we not only participate in the Art Biennale, but we also do architecture as well. So it's how do we as a National Pavilion continue to further that story of the UAE as a nation being a place that generates ideas and thoughts, but also has, let's say, if you think about the creative or the art biennale per se, that has creatives here that are doing really interesting things and have been doing it for a very long time, maybe even unbeknownst to their own communities here. And how do we showcase that, right? How do we give them that opportunity to push their practice further? How do we help them, pair them with the right curator, let's say, to help them kind of really delve deeper into why they do the things they do? Or in the case of, for example, this year, with the exhibition that we have, it's a solo exhibition of an artist who was part of the founding, let's say, fathers of contemporary art scene here in the UAE, and has been doing what he's been doing for like over 40 years. And a majority of the time, people kind of articulate or describe his work as land art, let's say. Whereas the curator who we paired him with this year comes from a background of Arab history, is a historian. A lot of curation, is originally from Egypt, but from Brussels at the same time, has a bit of both worlds. His aim was, how do we reinterpret art from this region by understanding our texts as well? So like poetry, history, creative writing, and how do we use that kind of language to describe the work and the practices that are like, how do we rewrite our histories from that lens as well? So, we're always trying to find these ways to kind of rejig or repush or just change perceptions, even not just outside, obviously at the Biennale, but also here at home. How do we rethink things sometimes? And so I hope that answers your question, kind
Yeah,
of.
can you give me perhaps an example of things or topics that you are at home, like trying to rethink or revisiting ideas that perhaps give an opportunity to it's evolving in the last, let's say, that's 20 to 30 years
Yeah.
since the UAE really have had this transformation, but not only internally, but also from people from all over the world, and now it's moving to the
Yeah.
region as well.
Yeah, there are a lot of people moving here for various different reasons. I would say, okay, so I'm going to go to the architecture Biennale.
Hmm.
It's easier to kind of really find a solid example. And I would say that in our first three architecture pavilions were more kind of a historical analysis, a kind of a housekeeping, so to speak, to really talk about what had happened, how cities were shaped and put together, and things like that, which was great. And then we decided, okay, well, how do we as the UAE, as a nation, become thought leaders? A lot of the problems that are happening around the world are also happening here. A lot of the issues that we face here within the UAE are issues that are global issues. So, for example, in 2020, the winning firm that got the curation was architecture lab called YY. So it's Wa'il Awar and Kenichi Teramoto. They were appointed just before COVID, funnily enough. And their whole premise was, okay, we, as arid climates, we use a lot of desalination. Desalination is not unique to the UAE. There are many other places around the world that use it. The method of desalination causes a lot of waste materials. How can we, because they're practicing architects, how can we reimagine the use of this way? Because also, as practicing architects, concrete is the major material that people use to build, like your houses, your buildings, everything. Concrete also exudes a lot of CO2. So if you're thinking about carbon emissions and pollution and all of those kind of things, so how do you reimagine there? Can we create a new type of material using this waste that we have a lot of, obviously, because there's a lot of desalination here? How do we reuse that waste and create a new type of material that we could eventually use to build our buildings with? And they came up with, they worked together with 2 universities here and one in Tokyo to come up with a formula that basically created these, obviously, and it's the smaller modules, but I can't tell you the chemistry of it, and I don't want to butcher it completely because I am obviously not a scientist, but they worked with these labs that were already kind of working on this already, but on a much smaller scale. But they pushed them to think of it as a larger scale project. Like, how can we build, let's say, bricks or something, some kind of unit that we could build with? Like, how do we create a material? So they did come up with a formula, and this formula actually needed CO2 to be absorbed to make the unit, like the tensile strength, to actually then build. And we built a module in the pavilion using this formula. We didn't ship anything. We sent the formula to our contractors in Venice to create these units, because the whole idea is that if we're building it here, we should be able to hypothetically ship it out anywhere for anyone to use and therefore build from it. And so they did manage to do that despite COVID. And they built this structure within our pavilion, which if you go to our website, you can see. And it's a really interesting, the premise behind it also. And it won them the Golden Lion at the end of the day, which is amazing. But it's an example of, it's very much an issue that exists here within the UAE. They use the UAE geography as an inspiration. So the other thing that exists a lot in the UAE are sabkhas, or salt flats. And the crust of these salt flats are very, very thick and are very, very strong. And in ancient times used to be used to build houses. Now, obviously, none of us want to encourage destroying ecological, miracles. So it's about, how do we study that environment? How do we study that? And then use that formula as our guide to then use this waste material and build something new. So it's kind of, this is the formula we use. We study our environment. We get inspiration from the UAE, from where we live. It's a problem that exists around the world. A lot of people encountered. A lot of people use desalination. We now have this formula that potentially could, be scaled up to become eventually one day, something, an alternative building material, and an alternative to concrete. So like these kind of moments are where you see a little bit of that push and pull. So, in my conversations with the curators, the push is getting them to focus the idea into something that is, you can articulate to a public who aren't necessarily architects, but also is very interesting to architecture. And yeah, it's a little bit of all of that. So it's pushing with them. It's also pushing for our funders to have faith that things are going to work out, and experimentation is good. Failure is not a bad thing. You can only learn from these things. So, there's a lot of those kind of things happening. I'm not really sure if I answered your question there.
You did. Is that? Yeah, I like what you said. It's almost like a failure can be an opportunity. Like if you're gonna fall forward.
Exactly.
And that's the thing too, because at the end of the day, when they're proposing such a radical idea, something so innovative, there's a chance that might not work out, might not meet the deadline that you needed to be there and present that.
Exactly.
Were you at that point having a plan B, or kind of thinking about what would we do if this doesn't work? What's going on in your mind in terms of
Oh,
your
there's
team
always,
deciding?
yes, there's always a plan B, always a plan B in some shape or form. I mean, we've been very fortunate, and I don't want to, jinx it or whatever, there's wood here somewhere, I'm going to touch it. But I do, believe that even a failed experiment is an experiment to be shared, because you can still learn from it at the end of the day. And if you are pushing for, this idea of innovation, especially in the field of architecture, which is here in the UAE, it's very standard. I don't know, hundreds of cranes around. There are always buildings being built. And people, when they think of an architecture biennale, think, oh, we're just talking about the architectural landscape of the UAE. And really, we want to move beyond that to really kind of think about, how are we building our cities? What are the spaces in between these buildings? How can we utilize them? How can we build differently? How can we build more consciously? How can we be more aware of the environments that we exist in and help shape our future building or cities? And sometimes these are not always conversations that people are ready to have or have answers to. But the fact that we're exploring them here, hopefully, and these are not questions that are unique just to the UAE. These are questions that I'm sure lots of other communities around the world deal with them. But my job is to, one, allow these curators, whether it's art or architecture, the space to explore, the space to experiment, and to do. And usually, even within that space of experimentation, there is always something that can be shown and shared. It's about how you are. And then our job is to help them articulate their journey has been so that we can share that with others. I always tell my team, I tell the curators, artists, whatever they're doing in Venice is usually just the tip of an iceberg of a longer journey and practice, right? So a lot of times they haven't had that space before to do these things. There aren't a lot of places in the UAE where you can just take time out of work and go and experiment in a lab. There aren't a lot of those kind of spaces yet here. And so the pavilion, and what we do is we give them that space and that time, even though it's a short time, really, when you think about it. It's a very short time for what we ask them to do, but we try to give them as much space and I just have to believe at the end of the day that there will be something that allows for a dialogue to happen, and that's the most important thing, in my opinion.
You talking about give them space and time, but now for those who are listening and watching us, to give them an idea, we're talking to Biennale usually defend art or architecture would take within every 2 years. So give me a time frame up to what point you start having those dialogues, the point that you have to show the community what you were doing, like how the whole beginning to end thing
So
works.
if we start backwards, the Biennale, for whether it's art or architecture, usually opens either in April for Art Biennale or beginning of May for the architecture. And then it runs until November. So that's about 6 or 7 months that this exhibition is open. So our deadline, let's say, because usually the Biennale is the opening days of the Biennale, which means you need, 6 to 8 months, hopefully, to allow them to do the research. Because again, like I said, there aren't a lot of facilities where this happens here. So sometimes it's the first time they actually are able to explore physically this idea on a large scale. And then they have to go into production. So if you open in April and May, starting if you go back to the January, that's when you need to start going into production. So September, before that, the year previous to that, you need to be heavily into the research. So the nomination process, so we have committee structures. We have, for architecture, we have an open call. For the Art Biennale, it's usually a nomination by the committee. They submit proposals. There's like 2 or 3 reviews before somebody gets nominated. And so it's like a constant cycle. So, it starts about a year ahead of, so let's say right now we're in an art year. We opened the current exhibition in April, and it will run until November. As soon as in April, June, we were already halfway through our architecture open call process. So by June, we had more or less gotten down to our 3 finalists, and we're selecting who our next curator would be, which we're going to be announcing in September. So we're already working with the architecture curator for 2025, but still working with the current artist and curator for art, because obviously, we have September, October, November, where the exhibition is still up. We still, need to make sure that we do programming here in the UAE to make sure that people know the stories. There's still like journalists and interviews, and, so that's still very much an active exhibition, but we're now also activating the current one for next year. So it's for us, it's like a constant hamster wheel where we're
I was about to
going.
say.
It doesn't stop. And I'm always, and like I said, we have a committee, and this committee is a diverse committee. It's members from, who hold high levels within government, and also people, it's always the previous curator, and then it's specialists within the industry from within the community. So we have people who come in as specialist invitees, whether it's art or architecture, to bring in that expertise, and trying to juggle everyone's schedules to come together to have these conversations can be challenging also. And I always feel like I'm fighting for more time to give to whoever is nominated, to allow them more time, but not too much time, because sometimes when you have too much time, then people waste it thinking, and sometimes you just have to start doing. So it's I would say it's about a year and a half cycle for each,
Yeah, it's a lot.
roughly.
I think it's interesting that you mentioned that when we think about the Biennale, we always think about the opening week, which gets a lot of press, there's a lot of tension around it, but it is something that happens for months, for the rest of the year. And you
Exactly.
talking about that is not only the opening, but you still have programming. You still have a full going on exhibition that you still need to take care of it for the rest of the year.
Exactly.
And that's something a lot of times I think you get overlooked. People don't really realize that.
Yes, exactly. So we have so one of the things that we do to make sure that the exhibition is taken care of is we run an internship program where we send young, like I said, it's a young country. You want to expose people to what's happening, young professors. So we, from the beginning, we have this internship program where we send young UAE nationals and long-term residents of the UAE to be docents of the pavilion. So they go for a month in batches of 3 every month. 3 leave from the UAE, young, eager, future leaders of our creative community. They go to Venice to take care of the pavilion, and they're partnered up with Italian interns from Ca' Foscari or UF, the 2 main universities there, and they take care of the pavilion. They're take care of the guests. They talk about the exhibition. They, clean and do condition reports. And so they get this, and they talk to their fellow docents from other pavilions. It's a really great, but it also gives us comfort, because what better way to integrate into the ecosystem here as well.
Clearly, of course, taking home the prize is a big statement of having a successful exhibition. But what are the other things for you when you look into the exhibitions that you moving on to the pavilions that you would define this was a successful endeavor? What are how are you measuring that? Is it visitors? It is press? It is influence. What it is that you and your team are looking at?
Yeah, I mean, the most obvious is press. That's the most tangible marker of success that you can track over time to see whether or not our impact at the Venice Biennale is working or having any kind of effect. And I would say, in that regard, over the years, so the UAE has been participating in the Art Biennale since 2009 and the Architecture Biennale since 2014. I joined in 2014. This year was my 10th exhibition in Venice. And so I can speak about these last 10 years, and I can definitely say, there is something to be said for consistently showing up and being present and being there, engaging with people. You see people returning who have come to our previous pavilions regularly. So that's one thing in terms of visitors, but you even see a shift in how media or journalists, let's say internationally, are reporting about what we're doing. It's definitely shifted. It's definitely become less of a, let me just copy and paste the press release, to, oh, let me read and do a little bit of research and actually come with some questions. Like, I really want to learn more about what they're trying to say, whoever our curator or artist or teams are. And so there's definitely more interest. And so that's definitely the tangible. The intangible parts are, I would say, the internship program. Over these last years, I mean, I know I say, I don't think anyone realized the impact that this internship program that existed since 2000. In 2009, it was more of a volunteer program, but ever since 2014, when we were showing up every year for art and architecture, it became more of a proper program with training sessions and workshops in Venice. And these individuals have come back, and it surprises me even sometimes when I go, let's say, to have a meeting. I don't know. There was one time I was in the design district area of Dubai, and I was going for some meeting with somebody, and this girl and I was carrying one of our tote bags, and this girl's like, "Oh my God, I was an intern in 2011." And I'm like, "Oh, wow, what is it?" She's like, "Yeah, no, I'm a director of blah, blah, blah." I can't remember what it was right now, but it just kind of shows you that if you look across any art institution in the UAE, you will find a Venice intern. If you look across the majority of the architectural firms within the UAE, you will find a Venice intern in there too. And so that's one thing. And then in talking to some of these interns who are now, let's say, professors at the universities, most of the universities have our interns too. Some of them have even told us that, the methodology that I learned by being part of this research team on this whatever year, we use that now in our classroom to do this, that, and whatever. These are things that are really hard to measure, but we try to keep in touch with our alumni to kind of find these things. And then the last thing that I would say is that sometimes it does affect policy on a governmental level. So, 2014 and 2016 pavilions were looking at our architectural heritage of the UAE. So the first one was like a survey of, the built environment in conjunction with what was happening around the world. The second one was specifically about Sheikh Zayed's national housing program that existed here, which was part of nation building and building the country. And the curator for that year, Yasser El-Shishtawi, wanted to go and do a survey of like, okay, where are these houses now? Like, do they still exist? Are they still being utilized? And, what he found was that this modular system that was brought into the UAE is still being, might have been forgotten in a way, but should, his proposition is like, we should re-examine it again. But, some of these houses still existed and, built on and added to and whatever else. And so this conversation of like modern heritage started coming up, and people started questioning, like, we shouldn't be tearing down all of these, homes to build all of these new high rises. Like, maybe we should preserve some, maybe we shouldn't. And there was, it took a couple of years, but now there is a modern heritage law or program within the Ministry of Culture to document and preserve or archive a lot of these, in some cases to save, but in some cases just to document, because obviously you're not going to save everything. Yeah. But, so it's now become a policy. It's become part of a ministerial initiative, let's say, which is something that we never thought would happen, but has happened at the same time.
And that must be so powerful for you to be able to see those things as well. As you mentioned, maybe press is the most tangible way that you can measure. Mm-hmm. But in the long term, having so many people throughout the years, we're talking about 10 years now, at least you've been around for 10 years. So each year being a chapter of this book, right? And then you look at the entire volume, it's more so much of measuring success, but really very much leaving a legacy of the pavilion that kind of flourish inside the community, which I think is a beautiful thing. And now being able to learn more from you, it gets me even more excited to the next time, to learn a little bit more, to be more invested. You kind of, that part of storytelling, I have a little bit more of I would say skin in the game now,
Okay,
good.
To be more so invested. We'll see you at the pavilion, hopefully.
Yeah, absolutely. I would love to, for sure. But that's all that I want to ask you, because often enough, the Biennale, at least in Venice, is often seen as a Eurocentric, right? How does the National Pavilion of the UAE contribute to representing the global South? And for the last few years, have you been able to noticing more emerging, younger countries being represented, or at least putting the effort to be there as well? And how important that would be for our country to have Venice. It's a beautiful place, but you have limitations in space.
Yeah,
and they're dealing with their own. They're dealing with their own way to manage that as well. But I want to hear more your perspective of the evolution of the Biennale itself and the countries that are being represented there.
Well, I mean, definitely over the last 10 years. I mean, the UAE's we've been participating since 2009, and it was when I think back to it, it's like it was a very different landscape here and there also. But over the last 10 years, I would say maybe over the last 5 years, definitely seeing a change where more countries from the region or from the global south, let's say, are experimenting or trying to find ways to be present, whether it's within the Biennale. So, Venice Biennale is the Giardini and the Arsenale for sure. But then there are a lot of outside, within the city of Venice, interventions and exhibitions. And I've had friends who, let's say from Pakistan, who are like, we, a group of us, we want to be present, and we're talking to governments and trying to figure out a way, I mean, it's not easy. It's financially very, very difficult. And you need to have some kind of government backing to be able to be present in the Biennale itself, to be a collateral event. And whenever anybody approaches, I'm always happy to talk to them about our experience. We now have Saudi Arabia as our neighbors, which is lovely. And to have our neighbors there, I mean, we're neighbors in geography, but now also neighbors at the Biennale as well. And we correspond, we do correspond. We keep in touch. We each, have our different systems of how we do things, but we're very much in sync when we're there. I think this year in the Art Biennale, not only was Saudi present, but Oman also had their second pavilion at the Art Biennale, which is really great to see. Lebanon also is showing up. Bahrain and Kuwait usually do architecture, so we usually see them in architecture years. And obviously there's Egypt in the Giardini. So there's becoming more of a presence, and I'm noticing even with the last two curators, art and architecture, the last couple of curators for the Biennale itself, there's definitely been more of a push to be more inclusive or to be more diverse and to bring in these other voices, which is really great to see. Really, really great to see that it's not just us, what we do in our own little pavilions, but also within the main exhibition itself, this diversifying of voices and viewpoints is also emerging and showing up as well. And I hope that continues.
Now, you can tell me if I'm wrong, but I have heard often enough that sometimes the Biennale is as much as about politics as it is about art and architecture. Mm-hmm. Do you feel that's kind of the case?
In what sense?
And,
I mean, everything is kind of politics. If you're doing anything, I mean, to be honest, whenever you're representing a nation, it's politics, right? I'm not an individual who has a project and I'm just showing up and doing it. We're there as the nation of the United Arab Emirates, and that comes inherently with this idea of, I mean, you're there, I mean, the Ministry of Foreign Affairs and whatever. I'm like, you are in showing up, it is politics in a way. But I want to understand, in what kind of politics are we talking about?
I think you elaborated very well, saying that you coming as represent the vision of that country. And of course, every country has its own politics involved with how they show themselves. You can say the Olympics has a lot to do with that as well, and you can go on and on and on about organizations that kind of represent the world in a certain way with their currently politics view. But in that case, do you feel that there has not been a problem for you, like an artist or an architect in UAE can challenge the status quo?
I think what we try to create, so if you just say, okay, so I understand what you're saying, and this is one of those fine lines sometimes, right? Mm-hmm. Where, sometimes we get confused, especially on the ground here, with whatever Expo is doing. So if you think of like an Expo Pavilion is also a nation's representation within a larger kind of fair, but it's a lot more, what I think is different between what we do in Venice, or any pavilion, not any, but a lot of pavilions in Venice, is that in an Expo, it is very much about showing a nation from a governmental perspective. These are the innovations and these are the things that we're doing, right? At the Biennale, so far we've managed to, yes, it is talking about the nation. Yes, we still need to, in some way, shape, or form, ensure that the story that we're telling is very much rooted within the UAE or from the UAE, because obviously not all of our curators come from here, whether art or architecture, and are not necessarily citizens, but they are very rooted in the story from here. But then my job and the team's job is like to allow, like I said before, to allow them that space to experiment. Obviously, you still are representing the country, so you need to take certain things maybe into consideration. But as much as possible, I would say, 90% of the time, we are able to allow them the bubble to fully experiment and go wherever they need to go, which is saying a lot for, a nation, especially when I talk to other countries. But, yeah, I mean, at the end of the day, it's about educating those that are funding us to understand that this is the artist, this is the curator, this is what they've experimented. We've nominated them based on XYZ practice. We have to trust in that process and allow them to do what they're doing. As long as they're not breaking any laws of Italy or the UAE, then it should be okay, right? So we've had moments where we've had a lot of discussions about what that means, because depending on who you work with, I think there was one year, I'm not going to say which year, but the curator had invited a particular writer to write in the publication, and this writer's way of writing uses a lot of swear words, right? But is a beautiful writer, and is a writer that talks about a particular experience of growing up in the UAE. Now, we just had to find a creative way to make sure that those swear words were in line with UAE laws, let's say, and so in other words, the essay and everything was like, okay, it's proved, but according to UAE law, we can't. I can't remember if it was actually this, swear words or something. There was something in there that we had to, with the graphic team, kind of find, which was already part of the publication anyway, but just position gently things.
Yeah.
That made sure that didn't compromise the writer's vision of the work, because at the end of the day, it's his work. He's an artist also, and we wanted to be true and make sure that this individual was comfortable with it. And we were able to find a compromise that worked for everyone at the end of the day.
What I like about this story is that because of that, it also allow you and your team to be creative with how to do it. You open up opportunity to drive even more creativity, to be able to showcase it and still maintain the integrity of the writer, but in a way that resonated with what you're trying to say and with what you're representing. So creativity exercising with limitations and boundaries and all of that. I think at the end of the day is what everybody's trying to work with from an artistic or architecture point of view. I do, however, want to talk a little bit about the region itself right now, because as you mentioned that we had in the last few years, the internships is a very young country. People are very excited to be there. There's a lot of people moving to the region as well in the last few decades. When you are meeting those people, engaging with students, what do you see? What seems to be I don't want to say the trend, but what seems to be the issue or the passion that people wants to pursue it, the things that's driving a little bit more the community right now?
I would say it's a number of things like this. These younger generations are a lot more vocal and engaged. I would say engaged is probably the better word, really. And I think a lot of that is because the previous years and the previous, whether it's artists or writers or gallerists or whatever, all the creatives, all the work that's been done previously has allowed and created an environment that's allowing them to become more engaged and actually questioning how we do things. It's also this kind of repositioning narratives or taking back narratives is a big topic here. And I find that really interesting also, right? So it's kind of what I discussed about how in our pavilion this year, the curator really wanted to reshape the narrative around this particular artist's work so that it's coming from a history that's rooted in the region rather than a history that's rooted from, let's say North America, let's say where land art originated, or the terminology for land art originated, and and proposing that as a way forward. So when you see younger generations also questioning this too, it's really interesting, and I'm really excited to see how that materializes going forward, because I don't have the answer to these things. But it's let's say it's not stagnant. It's definitely it's always interesting here. There's always somebody new coming up, or having a new talk, or having a new workshop, or doing something completely, thinking about things in different ways is really what I see happening a lot here now,
So
whether it's art or architecture.
it's safe to say that you are optimistic about the future.
I like to be optimistically, but I'm also a pessimist a little bit too at the same time, or a realist. Maybe a realist is more true. I'm a pessimistic optimist. I don't know. You can see the reality of things, but at the same time, I have this hope. I still have this belief that things will continue to grow and shift and change. And I do believe there's still a lot of work to be done here in terms of ensuring that, the conversations and the dialogue on a local level are enriched and are growing. Because as long as that's happening, then that means our pavilions will also continue to be interesting as well, right? At the end of the day, whatever we do in Venice is a reflection of whatever's happening here. So we are invested in things being interesting here and continuing.
Yeah. Laila, before I let you go, there's 3 questions I ask everybody here in the show, and it's your turn. So get ready. Number 1,
Okay.
I wanted to recommend us a book. It can be something that you read recently, or perhaps one of your favorites. Recommend us a movie, a TV, or a documentary, something to watch, and recommend us a guest. Who should we have here next on the show?
Invisible Cities. This is what I'm reading right now. Okay. And I'm really loving it. I haven't finished it yet. So that's the book that I would recommend. It was recommended to me, and I'm really enjoying that at the moment. The next thing, movies. It sounds really corny, and I don't necessarily know if I would recommend it for others, but one of my all-time favorites is, oh my God, I just forgot it right now. Oh my God. I'm drawing a blank. I know I have it. Wait.
This is my favorite part of the show because I got everybody so worked up about it.
Oh my God. Oh my God. Oh my God. Oh my God. Wait a minute. I can see it in my face right now. Oh my God. What is it called? It's like one of my favorite. It makes me laugh all the time. It's a Bruce Willis movie, sci-fi. Luc Besson is the director.
Elemental, right? No,
Is
Fifth
it?
Element. Fifth Element.
Okay, all-time favorite movie
Yeah.
is Fifth Element. Anytime I'm feeling down, I just need a ridiculous, save the world, but, I'm, making a joke of it, and I don't actually believe that I'm saving the world into the last minute movie, and a very colorful movie also. That's my go-to for
It's
sure.
a fun movie. I loved
It's
it.
a good movie. I think it's a comedy, but more than an action movie. So that's my all-time favorite. And then what was the other thing that
I
you...
guess, who should we have here next?
Oh, this is a really good one. I'm trying to think. I don't know. Do I have to answer that right now?
I mean, it can
I'm
be more
trying.
than one if you have more people in your mind. Like,
I would say Myrna Ayad. She's a writer, author. She used to be editor for Canvas magazine for many years. She's grown up in the UAE, but she's gone off now. She does a lot of cultural and arts policy, but she also writes a lot of art books, and has a very interesting and key and specific take on the art scene here in the UAE and the growth and nation also. I would say she would be a very interesting person for you to consider speaking to. She's also working in a series of children's books of Arabic, because for her, she's got 2 kids, and she's like, I can't find books of, Arabic icons, so I'm going to write them, So that's something that she's working on, which I hope she does soon and gets them published so I can buy for my nieces and nephews. But definitely an interesting person, I would say. Speak to her is a good one.
Bravo. Yeah, absolutely. Leila, Thank you so much for spending the last couple of no, last hour with me, and and to be able to teach me so
You're
much about what your work, what about what's going on, all the challenges, but also opportunities, and give us a
mhm,
very clear look what the Biennale and you, the Pavilion, of course, is looking
mhm.
to do, and the last not only the last 10 to 15 years, but also the years ahead. Thank you very much. I really appreciate talking to you, and I'm sure we're going to stay in touch.
No, thank you so much for giving me this opportunity. I love what you guys do, and I'm hoping we meet in person one day soon if
We'll
you ever
make it
come
work.
to the UAE or Venice, whichever one.